The Uses of Enchantment, The Meaning and Importance of Fairy Tales by Bruno Bettelheim. In the introduction, the fairy tale, a unique art form. While it entertains the child, the fairy tale enlightens him about himself and fosters his personality development. It offers meaning on so many different levels and enriches the child's existence in so many ways that no one book can do justice to the multitude and diversity of the contributions such tales make to the child's life. This book attempts to show how fairy stories represent in imaginative form what the process of healthy human development consists of, and how the tales make such development attractive for the child to engage in. This growth process begins with the resistance against the parents and fear of growing up, and ends when the youth has truly found itself, achieved psychological independence and moral maturity, and no longer views the other sex as threatening or demonic, but is able to relate positivity to it. In short, this book explicates why fairy tales make such great and positive psychological contributions to the child's inner growth. The delight we experience when we allow ourselves to respond to a fairy tale, the enchantment we feel, comes not from psychological meaning of a tale, although this contributes to it, but from its literary qualities, the tale itself as a work of art. The fairy tale could not have its psychological impact on the child were it not first and foremost a work of art. Fairy tales are unique not only as a form of literature, but as works of art which are fully comprehensible to the child as no other form of art is. As with all great art, the fairy tale's deepest meaning will be different for each person, and different for the same person at various moments in life. The child will extract a different meaning from the same fairy tale depending on his interests and needs of the moment. When given the chance, he will return to the same tale when he is ready to enlarge on old meanings or replace them with new ones. As works of art, fairy tales have many aspects worth exploring in addition to the psychological meaning and impact to which this book is devoted. For example, our cultural heritage finds expression in fairy tales, and through them is communicated to the child's mind. Another volume could detail the unique contribution fairy tales can and do make to the child's moral education, a topic which is only touched on in the pages which follow. Folklorists approach fairy tales in ways germane to their discipline. Linguists and literary critics examine their meaning for other reasons. It is interesting to observe that, for example, some see in the motif of Little Red Riding Hood's being swallowed by the wolf the theme of night devouring the day, of the moon eclipsing the sun, of winter replacing the warm seasons, of God swallowing the sacrificial victim, and so on. Interesting as such interpretations are, they seem to offer little to the parent or educator who wants to know what meaning a fairy story may have to the child, whose experience is, after all, quite far removed from the interpretations of the world on the basis of concerns with nature or celestial deities. Fairy tales also abound in religious motifs. Many biblical stories are of the same nature as fairy tales. The conscious and unconscious associations which fairy tales evoke in the mind of the listener depend on his general frame of reference and his personal preoccupations. Hence, religious persons will find in them much of importance that is not mentioned here. Most fairy tales originated in periods when religion was a most important part of life. Thus, they deal directly or by inference with religious themes. The stories of the 1001 Nights are full of references to Islamic religion. A great many Western fairy tales have religious content, but most of these stories are neglected today and unknown to the larger public just because, for many, these religious themes no longer arouse universally and personally meaningful associations. The neglect of Our Lady's Child, one of the most beautiful stories of the Brothers Grimm, illustrates this. It begins exactly like Hansel and Gretel. Hard by a great forest dwelt a woodcutter with his wife. As in Hansel and Gretel, the couple are so poor that they can no longer feed themselves and their 3-year-old daughter. Moved by their distress, the Virgin Mary appears to them and offers to take care of the little girl whom she takes with her to heaven. The girl lives a wonderful life there until she reaches the age of 14. At this time, much as in the very different tale of Bluebeard, the Virgin entrusts the girl with the keys to 13 doors, 12 of which she may open, but not the 13th. The girl cannot resist this temptation. She lies about it, and in consequence has to return to Earth, mute. She undergoes severe ordeals, and is about to be burned at the stake. At this moment, as she desires only to confess her misdeed, she regains her voice to do so, and is granted by the Virgin happiness for her whole life. The lesson of the story is, a voice used to tell lies leads us only to perdition. Better we should be deprived of it, as is the heroine of the story. But a voice used to repent, to admit our failures, and state the truth, redeems us. Quite a few of the Brothers Grimm's other stories contain or begin with religious allusions. The old man made young again starts, "At the time when our Lord still walked the earth, he and St. Peter stopped one evening at a smith's house." In another story, The Poor Man and the Rich Man, God, like any other fairy tale hero, is tired from walking. That story begins, "In olden times, when the Lord himself still used to walk about on this earth amongst men, it once happened that he was tired and overtaken by the darkness before he could reach an inn. Now there stood on the road before him 2 houses facing each other." But important and fascinating as these religious aspects of fairy tales are, they remain beyond the scope and purpose of this book, and so are left unexamined here. Even given this book's relatively restricted purpose, that of suggesting why fairy tales are so meaningful to children in helping them cope with psychological problems of growing up and integrating their personalities, some serious but necessary limitations have had to be accepted. The first of these lies in the fact that today only a small number of fairy tales are widely known. Most of the points made in this book could have been illustrated more vividly if some of the more obscure fairy stories could have been referred to. But since these tales, though once familiar, are presently unknown, it would have been necessary to reprint them here, making for a book of unwieldy size. Therefore, the decision was made to concentrate on a few still popular fairy stories, to show some of their underlying meanings and how these may relate to the child's growing up problems, to our understanding of ourselves and of the world. And the second part of the book, rather than striving for an exhaustive completeness that is beyond reach, examines some well-known favorites in some detail, for the meaning and pleasure that may be gained from them. If this book had been devoted to only 1 or 2 tales, it would have been possible to show many more of their facets, although even then complete probing of their depths would not have been achieved. For this, each story has meanings on too many levels. Which story is most important to a particular child at a particular age depends entirely on his psychological stage of development and the problems which are most pressing to him at the moment. While in writing the book it seemed reasonable to concentrate on a fairy tale's central meanings, this has the shortcoming of neglecting other aspects which might be much more significant to some individual child because of problems he is struggling with at the time. This, then, is another necessary limitation of this presentation. For example, in discussing Hansel and Gretel, the child striving to hold on to his parents even though the time has come for meeting the world on his own is stressed, as well as the need to transcend a primitive orality symbolized by the children's infatuation with the gingerbread house. Thus, it would seem that this fairy tale has most to offer to the young child ready to make his first steps out into the world. It gives body to his anxieties and offers reassurance about these fears because even in their most exaggerated form, anxieties about being devoured, they prove unwarranted. The children are victorious in the end, and a most threatening enemy, the witch, is utterly defeated. Thus, a good case could be made that this story has its greatest appeal and value for the child at the age when fairy tales begin to exercise their beneficial impact, that is, around the age of 4 or 5. But separation anxiety, the fear of being deserted, and starvation fear, including oral greediness, are not restricted to a particular period of development. Such fears occur at all ages in the unconscious, and thus this tale also has meaning for and provides encouragement to much older children. As a matter of fact, the older person might find it considerably more difficult to admit consciously his fear of being deserted by his parents or to face his oral greed, and this is even more reason to let the fairy tale speak to his unconscious, give body to his unconscious anxieties, and relieve them, without this ever coming to conscious awareness. Other features of the same story may offer much-needed reassurance and guidance to an older child. In early adolescence, a girl had been fascinated by Hansel and Gretel and had derived great comfort from reading and rereading it, fantasizing about it. As a child, she had been dominated by a slightly older brother. He had, in a way, shown her the path, as Hansel did when he put down the pebbles which guided his sister and himself back home. As an adolescent, this girl continued to rely on her brother, and this feature of the story felt reassuring. But at the same time, she also resented the brother's dominance. Without her being conscious of it at the time, her struggle for independence rotated around the figure of Hansel. The story told her unconscious that to follow Hansel's lead led her back, not forward, and was also meaningful that although Hansel was the leader at the story's beginning, it was Gretel who, in the end, achieved freedom and independence for both, because it was she who defeated the witch. As an adult, this woman came to understand that the fairy tale had helped her greatly in throwing off her dependence on her brother, as it had convinced her that an early dependence on him need not interfere with her late ascendancy. Thus, a story which for one reason had been meaningful to her as a child provided guidance for her at adolescence for quite a different reason. The central motif of Snow White is the pubertal girl's surpassing in every way the evil stepmother who, out of jealousy, denies her an independent existence, symbolically represented by the stepmothers trying to see Snow White destroyed. The story's deepest meaning for one particular 5-year-old, however, was far removed from these pubertal problems. Her mother was cold and distant, so much so that she felt lost. The story assured her that she need not despair. Snow White, betrayed by her stepmother, was saved by males, first the dwarves and later the prince. This child, too, did not despair because of the mother's desertion, but trusted that rescue would come from males. Confident that Snow White showed her the way, she turned to her father, who responded favorably. The fairy tale's happy ending made it possible for this girl to find a happy solution to the impasse in living into which her mother's lack of interest had projected her. Thus, a fairy tale can have as important a meaning to a 5-year-old as to a 13-year-old, although the personal meanings they derive from it may be quite different. In Rapunzel, we learn that the enchantress locked Rapunzel into the tower when she reached the age of 12. Thus, hers is likewise the story of a pubertal girl and a jealous mother who tries to prevent her from gaining independence, a typical adolescent problem which finds a happy solution when Rapunzel becomes united with her prince. But one 5-year-old boy gained quite a different reassurance from the story. When he learned that his grandmother, who took care of him most of the day, would have to go to the hospital because of a serious illness, his mother was working all day, and there was no father in the home, he asked to be read the story of Rapunzel. At this critical time in his life, 2 elements of the tale were important to him. First, there was the security from all dangers in which the substitute mother kept the child, an idea which greatly appealed to him at that moment. So what normally could be viewed as a representation of negative, selfish behavior was capable of having a most reassuring meaning under the specific circumstances. And even more important to the boy was another central motif of the story, that Rapunzel found the means of escaping her predicament in her own body, the tresses on which the prince climbed up to her room in the tower. That one's body can provide a lifeline reassured him that, if necessary, he would similarly find in his own body the source of his security. This shows that a fairy tale, because it addresses itself in the most imaginative form to essential human problems and does so in an indirect way, can have much to offer to a little boy even if the story's heroine is an adolescent girl. These examples may help to counteract an impression made by my concentration here on a story's main motifs and demonstrate that fairy tales have great psychological meaning for children of all ages, both girls and boys, irrespective of the age and sex of the story's hero. Rich personal meaning is gained from fairy stories because they facilitate changes in identification as the child deals with different problems, one at a time. In the light of her earlier identification with a Gretel who was glad to be led by Hansel, the adolescent girl's later identification with a Gretel who overcame the witch made her growth toward independence more rewarding and secure. The little boy's first finding security in the idea of being kept within the safety of the tower permitted him later on to glory in the realization that a much more dependable security could be found in what his body had to offer him by way of providing him with a lifeline. As we cannot know at what age a particular fairy tale will be most important to a particular child, we cannot ourselves decide which of the many tales he should be told at any given time or why. This only the child can determine and reveal by the strength of feeling with which he reacts to what a tale evokes in his conscious and unconscious mind. Naturally, a parent will begin by telling or reading to his child a tale the parent himself or herself cared for as a child or cares for now. If the child does not take to the story, this means that its motifs or themes have failed to evoke a meaningful response at this moment in his life. Then it is best to tell him another fairy tale the next evening. Soon he will indicate that a certain story has become important to him by his immediate response to it, or by his asking to be told the story over and over again. If all goes well, the child's enthusiasm for the story will be contagious, and the story will become important to the parent too, if for no other reason than that it means so much to the child. Finally, there will come the time when the child has gained all he can from the preferred story, or the problems which made him respond to it have been replaced by others which find better expression in some other tale. He may then temporarily lose interest in this story and enjoy some other one much more. In the telling of fairy stories, it is always best to follow the child's lead. Even if a parent should guess correctly why his child has become involved emotionally with a given tale, this knowledge is best kept to oneself. The young child's most important experiences and reactions are largely subconscious and should remain so until he reaches a much more mature age in understanding. It is always intrusive to interpret a person's unconscious thoughts, to make conscious what he wishes to keep preconscious, and this is especially true in the case of a child. Just as important for the child's well-being as feeling that his parent shares his emotions through enjoying the same fairy tale is the child's feeling that his inner thoughts are not known to his parent until he decides to reveal them. If the parent indicates that he knows them already, the child is prevented from making the most precious gift to his parent of sharing with him what until then was a secret and private to the child. And since, in addition, a parent is so much more powerful than a child, his domination may appear limitless and hence destructively overwhelming if he seems able to read the child's secret thoughts, know his most hidden feelings, even before the child himself has begun to become aware of them. Explaining to a child why a fairy tale is so captivating to him destroys, moreover, the story's enchantment, which depends to a considerable degree on the child's not quite knowing why he is delighted by it. And with the forfeiture of this power to enchant goes also a loss of the story's potential for helping the child struggle on his own and master all by himself the problem which has made the story meaningful to him in the first place. Adult interpretations, as correct as they may be, rob the child of the opportunity to feel that he, on his own, through repeated hearing and ruminating about the story, has coped successfully with a difficult situation. We grow, we find meaning in life and security in ourselves by having understood and solved personal problems on our own, not by having them explained to us by others. Fairy tale motifs are not neurotic symptoms, something one is better off understanding rationally so that one can rid oneself of them. Such motifs are experienced as wondrous because the child feels understood and appreciated deep down in his feelings, hopes, and anxieties without these all having to be dragged up and investigated in the harsh light of reality that is still beyond him. Fairy tales enrich the child's life and give it an enchanted quality just because he does not quite know how the stories have worked their wonder on him. This book has been written to help adults, and most especially those with children in their care, to become more fully aware of the importance of such tales. As has already been pointed out, innumerable interpretations besides those suggested in the text that follows may be pertinent. Fairy tales, like all true works of art, possess a multifarious richness and depth that far transcend what even the most thorough discursive examination can extract from them. What is said in this book should be viewed as illustrative and suggestive merely. If the reader is stimulated to go beyond the surface in his own way, he will extract ever more varied personal meaning from these stories, which will then also become more meaningful to the children he may tell them to. Here, however, one especially crucial limitation must be noted. The true meaning and impact of a fairy tale can be appreciated. Its enchantment can be experienced only from the story in its original form. Describing the significant features of a fairy tale gives us little feeling for what it is all about, as the listing of the events of a poem does for its appreciation. Such a description of main features, however, is all that a book like this one can provide, short of actually reprinting the stories. Since most of these fairy tales are readily available elsewhere, the hope is that this book will be read in conjunction with a rereading of the tales discussed. Whether it is Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, or any other fairy tale, only the story itself permits an appreciation of its poetic qualities, and with it an understanding of how it enriches a responsive mind.